Hello, everyone. Welcome to another Finding Solutions channel episode. My name is Tom, and we've got Parker and Ben with us today. Hey, guys, how are you doing?
Doing
Doing well. How
awesome.
you doing?
So, summer's heating up. We're right in the middle of summer. We just had the 4th of July. Do you guys have any fun plans or been up to anything cool?
Yeah, so I live like about an hour south of Salt Lake City here in Utah. So weather's super hot, trying to get out as much as I can, enjoy the mountains, enjoy the weather. So it's been a good July so far. So it's been fun.
Yeah, this heat is killer. I'm training for an Ironman right now that I got roped into, and the heat is
Oh,
just absolutely killing me. So,
I don't know how you get roped into an Ironman, but that does not sound like something I would ever let myself get roped into. Just saying.
yeah, I don't know how, but here I am. So,
If I got
gotta.
a wiffle ball and a paddle in my hand and a net, then I might get roped into something like that, but not an Ironman.
So
So
I'm guessing you've been playing a lot of pickleball then.
a little bit of pickleball for sure. My wife and I did a tournament this weekend. We got
Oh
like
wow.
third. Little disappointed in that, but it's fun.
What
But
ranking tournament was it?
oh,
4-0,
yeah,
4-5?
it was 4-0 mixed doubles. So
Oh,
we're
okay,
getting there,
that's pretty good.
one step at a time. No, we do enjoy it. But yeah, I found out a long time ago that anything to do with long distance is not something I would enjoy doing. So Ironman, no way. It's
I don't
impressive,
enjoy
man.
it.
It is
I don't
impressive.
enjoy it, but
Well, it's
we're
impressive.
doing it. Oh,
You enjoy it
well,
on some level.
we'll
Obviously,
see
you
it.
do it
We'll see if I finish. Check back in a few months, and we'll have an update if I
if you're
finish or not.
alive. Okay, we'll check
Yeah.
back in. Well, I'm actually really excited about today's topic. So, today we're going to talk about just management styles. You know, in all business systems, we have all this data coming in, and then we have to consume that data and do something with it. As leaders, you have to look at the data to make decisions. As employees, you're inputting data to help basically describe the work that's getting done and the work that needs to be done, et cetera. So, Ben, why don't you take it away? What's management by exception, and why is this a topic we're even talking about today?
Yeah, this is a really important thing for just a lot of different companies. So there are kind of two different philosophies when it comes to management for a time system, for example, or an engagement platform. So if you don't manage by exception, picture this: an employee is going to do an action. They're punching in, for example. They're just ready to get to work. They go to punch in and they can't for whatever reason. Let's say they're using a time clock that uses biometrics and it can't find their face because maybe the sun's right behind them, is casting a shadow or something, and they all of a sudden can't punch in and it becomes a disruption for the day. So on the flip side of that, managing by exception allows basically let the employee punch in. If there's any details that aren't what we think they should be, we're going to let them punch in, let them go to work or punch out, but let's just flag it on the back end so a supervisor can then review it and they move on with their day.
So why does that matter? I mean, why does it matter if you make them put the? Why don't you just make them put the right info in? I mean, isn't it garbage in, garbage out? Don't you want the right data in there? Why are you letting them get in, punch in or out without having the right data?
Yeah, I mean, the right data is there. You just need to review it. So, for an example, some of our clients or some companies, they require employees to say, I'm wearing my PPE gear for the day.
Hmm.
And if they say no, they can't punch in. Well, what happens if they accidentally say no and then they go back and they need to punch in and they're now blocked from getting in the system? Well,
Yeah.
you should flag that punch, but let them go back in and just punch. And then you have one you just need to clear and you ask the employee, hey, what happened? Oh,
Yeah.
I just did the wrong one. Now they don't have to call a supervisor. There's no time edits made. So that's why it's
Interesting.
important. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have a story on that one. I guess we call it the gatekeeper versus the exception model, right? The gatekeeper is, I think the classic gatekeeper is like the TSA that we all hate. We have to line up and go through, and they pull out our ID, or they're doing a lot of biometrics now, but they have to verify 100% of the time that we really are who we say they are. There is no other option. They're not going to let us through that line unless they can verify our identity, right? So that's a gatekeeper. But here's where the gatekeeper, I think, really falls short for something like biometrics for time tracking. So I was it was a food production facility in California. I think they made ranch dressing, I believe. So it was really fascinating to be there. And we were actually, this is years and years ago, we were actually part of just a team doing an assessment. I was just starting out we were trying to figure out how to do our own type keeping clock. And we went and we met with the head of IT for that facility, and we saw they had this really expensive palm print reader biometric clock on the wall. I'm like, oh, that's cool. And in my head, of course, I'm thinking, man, how are we going to ever compete with that thing? I mean, that's reading a palm. It's going to have really high degree of accuracy, but it was turned off and nobody was using it. They were all punching in using just, I think, either a swipe clock or put their last four of their social in, which is a terrible way to do it. And I asked the guy, I'm like, well, what's wrong with that one? You guys spent $5,000 on that clock. And he's like, well, it's just too much of the time it wouldn't read their hand and wouldn't read it fast enough. And there was a gatekeeper system, right? So it was actually really, really good at making sure absolutely nobody could punch in without identifying them, just like the TSA would be. But the flaw was it was too slow. And what happened if it can't read their hand? My wife she does hair for a living, so she's working with chemicals. And even though she wears gloves and things, her fingerprints are rubbed off. Like she can't use, when she had the old iPhone before facial recognition, she could not use the fingerprint reader. Wouldn't read her fingerprints, and handprint readers are similar. And so that's one example of a gatekeeper system that actually thwarted the whole system. Now the supervisors are saying, well, okay, John's hand can't be read. I'm going to manually enter their time. And once I can manually enter it for John, then I have an excuse to manually enter it for Ben. And what if Ben didn't even show up that day? What if Ben's not a real person? Maybe I hired Ben and he's a ghost employee. So actually, what's ironic is the idea of exception-based systems versus gatekeeper, for me, actually goes back to fraud prevention too. But there's a quick story. That was a handprint reader that, because it was gatekeeper, really actually prevented the system from working, and they ended up turning it off. It worked fine. It's just it didn't read people fast enough.
So gatekeeper systems introduce some sort of fraud potentially, is what you're kind of saying.
Oh, no question. Absolutely. And 11 years ago, I learned that the hard way. I didn't realize how much fraud was committed by site managers and supervisors. And most are great. You have to trust people. But why put that trust in their hands? There's no reason ever to put the burden of, error rates on your supervisors. If a biometric can't be read, for example, make it an exception and take it out of their hands. That way, there's no question. People can log their time and get to work. Because the one thing those clocks do really, really well is they record the time. Just record the time and move on. And that's why we think facial recognition is so powerful, because you can edit, you can review that later. You can't review a palm print reader later as a human, a layperson, or a fingerprint or an iris or any of those things. That's why facial recognition is so good. But yeah.
So if there was an exception created from, like, let's say Parker goes to punch in and he's wearing a mask. So walk through, what does an exception even mean? Or what does it look like? Or what should it look like?
Yeah. So you think about it. If I'm getting up to the clock and I'm going to work, by the way, we're getting really good with masks too. So even that doesn't necessarily mean it's an exception. But yeah, let's just say I'm wearing, a hood over my face. In good systems where there's an managed by exception workflow, you're going to let them punch in, you're going to flag it, and that employee has a responsibility. Unlike the TSA scenario, which has to be gatekeeper, they aren't going in to rob the place that's making ranch dressing every day. They're going into work, right? So it's a different dynamic. So you don't actually have to have the same mentality with a lot of these systems that have been gatekeeper. You can say, let's let them go in anyway. They have that mask on, or they've got something obscuring their face. You let them go to work. That's flagged. It can be reviewed by either some kind of administrator, where their whole job is to look at that and say, well, why is Ben wearing something over his face? That's a problem. You can take action after the fact, but yet the person can still go to work. The supervisors aren't tempted to start getting into manually adding time. And it's actually the managed by exception workflow that helps prevent all that fraud, even though it seems like the opposite, like it's less secure. Because it's convenient and you remove that excuse, they can get to work.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me.
No,
So
that's awesome.
So Parker, just a question for you. We talked a bunch about biometrics. What other, there's obviously other scenarios, right, for gatekeeper versus exception.
Oh, for sure. And there's multiple different exceptions that you can view in your account, here at Find. There's also different features as well. I know there's lots of clients that love the subscription notifications. So basically, if Ben goes into work, he clocks in, he clocks out, someone goes in, clocks in for Ben, and there's a biometric exception, for example, I can go in and say, hey, as an admin, I want to subscribe to all the biometric settings or biometric exceptions for certain employees or all employees, and get a text or get an email, or in the app itself get a push notification. So I think there's so many different ways to utilize these and to get notified. So it's pretty cool to see what happens. And that's kind of my next question, like going along the lines of our last conversation. How is AI going to change this? How are large language models going to change the future of managing by exceptions? In your guys' opinions?
Yeah, I have an opinion. Ben, do you have an opinion on that? Because I do.
I know you do. I'll just toss out this. I think it'll be important for trend analysis, and that might be where you're going. But basically, to be able to catch up on trends on which sites are actually going to the biometric exception again, which sites are really good at having their employees scan in, use their face every time. There's no buddy punching. Which ones are lacking in that? And AI can, if you have 1,000 sites, job sites, AI can detect the anomalies or location exceptions. Let's say you have everyone use their personal phones. How many people are clocking in from their bedroom, at their house or at Starbucks or McDonald's, as opposed to actually at the job site? And AI can probably help find a lot of trends, whether it's on an employee basis, job basis, or a region of your company or something like that. But
Yeah,
I'm sure you
I think
have
that's
more
a
thoughts
great
on
point,
that.
Tom. Yeah, great point. I think there's two aspects of AI. The large language model I'll get to next, because that's what, Parker, you asked about specifically. And Ben, you were talking about AI's ability to find anomalies and trends. I think that we can do that algorithmically. Trends that go up and down, if people have a higher rate of exceptions or something, that's an easy one for us to understand mathematically. But I think AI in particular is really good at finding trends that are hard to have thought through well enough to develop an algorithm to find for you. So, for example, credit card companies have been doing this type of thing for a long time, and AI, I'm sure, is part of their scenario. When I go to pay for dinner and I happen to be traveling, maybe I'm to a country I've never been, oftentimes I'll get that flagged. They actually use an exception model too, but they'll let me pay for dinner and leave. They put it on the actual restaurant where they'll hold that money until I confirm that I'm really me. That's a really good example of where AI might be able to spot an anomaly. It doesn't know necessarily what the anomaly is. It doesn't have to actually know that it's because I'm in another country. AI has the ability to spot those trends in ways that we can't imagine. So, yeah, fine. We're adding trend analysis. So it's not just biometrics. Things like location exceptions. Again, location exceptions, the type of work that's being described. If we let people just get to work, we create an environment where we can gather all the data. They're getting into work. We're not holding them up with a gatekeeper. There's no lines behind clocks. There's no frustration by the employee and then the supervisor. Let the AI and other trend analysis spot the exceptions and flag them. And that will actually, I think, solve the problem. That makes it really, really convenient for both parties. And frankly, the users, the employees, are typically not doing anything wrong. False negatives are the biggest problem, meaning they're trying to do the right thing and it's not reading them. So, but the large language model, just to end there real quick, large language model is another name for something like ChatGPT or Bard. These large language models, for everybody in tech, everybody's talking about it. I see it everywhere. And maybe I'm just seeing what I want to see. The phenomenon of large language models is that it allows you to dive into the data in a very natural way. And that's different than using interfaces with graphs and lists and tables and spreadsheets. And even, Parker, what you brought up, exceptions pinging me, right? Where it's just bombarding me with, hey, I got 5 people today that, we couldn't find their face, come look at them. The idea of the large language model is it can talk to you either via text message or in our case, we've got a knowledge bot, so you can text back and forth with it and ask these kind of complex questions. In the future, that'll be a voice conversation, just like I have with you, Parker. If we have a conversation where I want to ask you a question like, hey, how is our this, that, or other going with Company of Find? You can tell me. So I think that's where large language models will revolutionize all this, is it's actually an interface change, just like the mouse was an input change, or AirPods or touch screens or all of those things. I think large language models, perhaps in my view, the most revolutionary input change we've ever seen, and it's a whole new class on top of some of our speech recognition and their virtual assistants we've all been fighting through in the last 10 years. So it will be the ultimate managed by exception game changer, because I can go, the data will find me. I don't have to go find the data. The exceptions will find me, and it'll tell me and summarize them and editorialize them for me. So, I'd have a lot to say there, Ben. You're smirking, I can tell.
Yep. Nope. I get it. But I like the view of being able to pick up a phone and say, hey, how's my company doing today from an employee labor perspective?
That's right.
Oh, you're over budget here. This employee has had its fourth biometric exception in the last week. These 3 employees looks like they might be leaving soon based on some data. Maybe reach out to them and see how they're doing.
Exactly. Boom. And it may be something like, hey, there's something going on in the South Division. We're seeing some anomalies. You may want to check it out. And then it waits for you to ask details. Like, whoa, what's going on? Well, we've got these things happening. Like you said, it could be biometric, it could be location, it could be just something with very subtle data shifts, like they're working slightly more every day. And to your point, what we're working on are things like, is this person going to be a high risk of leaving? Say they're a key employee and there's something that you see that leads you to believe they might be leaving. So yeah, I'm really excited about where we're going with these AI-driven large language models and trend analysis for sure. So, well, we could talk about this all day, as you guys probably agree. But in conclusion, I guess to summarize, exceptions work. If you're bombarded with too much data, you ignore it. If a system is gatekeeper, it'll often get turned off. If it keeps people from doing their core job, then the best data gathering becomes the worst data gathering because it's not used. So there's this kind of balance between convenience and understanding the task at hand. And when you can manage by exception, and it helps you gather all this underlying data that identifies these trends and truly lets employees, their managers and leaders get to work, and hopefully they're only being delivered the most relevant information through these exceptions for them to be able to make decisions and make changes. Any final thoughts before we wrap up?
It's exciting stuff. I'm excited to see what the future holds.
Yeah, me too. As long as the AI is nice and doesn't want to wipe us out, we'll all be in a good spot. But that is way beyond our pay grade when we're talking about AI that's just looking for simple trends and helping to chat with you. So, all right. Well, we will look forward to our next episode, the Finding Solution channel. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Thanks, Parker.